Welcome to Free Exchange. I'm Howard Wall, the director of the Hammond Institute for Free Enterprise at Lindenwood University. I'm here with my colleague Rachel Douchant, who is the director of the Liberty and Ethics Center here at Lindenwood. And we're going to discuss or have a conversation about the potential benefits or problems with allowing people to be paid for their internal organs as for transplant, not just for show or for display, but for actual medical purposes. Now, let me just lay out the issue. And kidneys is the one that's kind of gets things going because you have two kidneys. Everyone is born normally with two kidneys, so a live person can give up a kidney and continue on living a perfectly happy and healthy life. Mm-hmm. So there's potential for, if someone needs a transplant, then they can pay someone for one of their extra kidneys, mm-hmm. as such. So this opens up all sorts of issues, both ethical and economic. Right. And then there's other types of transplants where it's you can't transplant your heart. Oh, that's why I always tell my students that I can donate my heart because as an economist, I haven't used it very much, so it's fine.
No, but it's already cold and dead.
Yes,
so
that's the problem. It would only be
it's useless.
I'm not sure who it would help except the Grinch, perhaps. So, but that's a separate bunch of issues where it's not the person living who sells it, but there could be still some monetary transaction.
To the family of the
family or
dead?
Or maybe to the person before they die, but
mm-hmm.
It's not the same.
Okay.
Now, of course, in the United States and in every country in the world except for Iran, it's illegal to pay somebody for their organs.
Right.
And Iran is also the only country where there's no shortage of organs, kidneys in particular.
Has happened. The Philippines are now joining this.
I think they're in the process, or they're thinking about it.
Okay, yeah.
And there's a lot of, I guess there's a big ick factor when it comes to having a market for kidneys. You can imagine setting up like I'll buy your gold with people with placards saying, kidneys needed, give me your kidney, and then you stop in and just kind of drop off one of your kidneys. But, so that's the Wild West version of a kidney market. But mm-hmm. But really, we're talking about something much more closely regulated, obviously, and mm-hmm. done in hospitals. But the economic argument for it is extremely simple because right now, basically, the price of a kidney is set at zero. So as a result, the supply of kidneys is extremely low, but the demand for kidneys is determined by medical need. So there's a huge gap. So there are maybe 10,000 or so kidney transplants done a year, 95 to 100,000 people waiting on the mm-hmm. kidney transplant list, and close to 4,000 people per year die waiting for a kidney. Mm-hmm. And the reason they're dying is because there aren't enough kidneys, so they wait and wait. And depending on where you live, it could be up to 3, 4, 4.5, 5 years where you have to go to dialysis regularly and so on, and then eventually you might die anyway before you even get a kidney. Mm-hmm. So the economic argument, it's like you set a price that's too low, you're going to get the supply is too low, so you're going to get a shortage. So to an economist as well, you have to allow people to be paid, then more people will mm-hmm. provide their kidneys and more people will get kidney transplants and more people will live.
Right.
So in terms of just the straight economics of it, it's an incredibly easy issue to deal with. However, there are other things besides economics, I suppose. Other concerns than just the price and the quantity. So. Well,
I mean, there are plenty of things that.
Well, and I should say, in my class, whenever I talk about this, I stop and say, I'm sure there's someone over in the philosophy department who can deal with this.
That's right. I just do the science.
I just draw the lines.
right. I just draw the graphs. So the supply and demand issue is clear. But there are plenty of things that there's a demand for that we don't want to allow there to be a legal supply of. I mean, there's probably a demand for assassins But we don't say, oh, look, we have a black market in assassins, and so we better, eliminate the black market in assassins by allowing people to hire them legally. I mean, that would be ridiculous. So we can do that, right, in various situations. The question is why? I mean, why do we want to limit the sale of human organs? And I think the main logic of that is this notion of commodification, that human beings have a special dignity and value that's different from objects. And I can sell this table, and no one has a problem with that. But if I sell my body, we feel a lot more concerned about that sort of thing. And we don't want to treat people like a commodity. But then again, I sell my labor every day, right? And some people do very dangerous jobs. We pay our military, members of our military. We pay cave miners, or coal miners. And so, it's kind of more of a question of where do you draw the line, I suppose. I can't sell myself into slavery. I can't, for instance, make a deal with you like these Craigslist deals where they're going to get together and kill each other, or one's going to eat the other one or something like that. That none of those are legal, even though they're voluntary. I don't know. Maybe there's some libertarian somewhere who wants to defend that deal.
I'm sure there is.
I'm sure there are. I really am fine with leaving that illegal, but what in particular is objectionable about an organ? I can sell my hair. And other parts of myself, blood, plasma. There's the new thing with the bone marrow. Have you heard about this?
Yes, it's no longer a transplant of marrow, but it's
like an extraction. Yeah. They get it to extract it into the blood. Well, now because it's sort of a liquid and you can just extract it out, it's okay. And there's been a court ruling on it and everything. And so why are we drawing the line right there between, sort of bodily fluids and an organ?
Well, I believe the medical ethics problem with paying people for their transplants or for their organs is that, especially with kidneys, is that a doctor would then be doing some harm to somebody.
The do no harm.
Because taking someone's kidney out, even though they can live perfectly fine, it is a risk.
Right.
And they will not be as better off. They still have to limit their lifestyle afterwards.
Right.
And the medical ethics argument is that you can't do. You can't purposely make someone worse off, even though you're making someone else better off. And then, like you say, the bone marrow case is a gray area, but they were taking the bone marrow before. Now they have a less invasive way of doing it, but the bone marrow was you were making someone worse by taking their bone marrow.
But that was
then it regenerated. It was also voluntary.
We weren't paying them. It was only the paying that made the difference. Right. So what they're saying is now you can pay.
Now you might be able to pay.
Right.
So it's kind of pushing back at that payment idea.
Yeah, so the do no harm is interesting. It's a Hippocratic oath, right? On the other hand, we have surgical procedures that we do that we could argue are very risky physically, but we think that they do psychological good. So plastic surgery would be an example. I mean, you're going under general anesthesia. People can die from that. Joan Rivers just did, right? And sex changes are an example. I mean, there you have a perfectly well-functioning organ that's being removed because of a psychological gain. And so if you have someone who's very poor, could you argue that they're taking that surgical risk, that physical risk, for a financial gain, which we think, money's just money, but to a poor person, that could be the capital they need to fund their education or to start their business.
Well, one of the common arguments against allowing people to sell their kidneys is that only poor people would sell their kidneys.
Yeah.
And that might be true, but it wouldn't be only rich people who would get the kidneys because the transplants are paid by a third party, by insurance, either through the government or private sector.
Yeah.
So half of the argument is nonsense. And for the other half of the argument, that it's only poor people would sell them, I answer, why do you hate poor people so much? They don't have much going for them, and they have one thing that they might get tens of thousands of dollars to change their life, and you're not allowing them to do it.
And
so
right.
I'm not persuaded by that particular argument, while the other ones are more persuasive.
That sounds creepy to people, I'm sure.
The intended.
Right.
Yes, it was intended.
So why do you hate poor people so much? Let them sell their organs. On the other hand, and this goes back to comments we've made in other conversations of ours about the status quo, we're used to the fact that, who goes into the military? The working poor, oftentimes, right?
That's actually false.
Is that also false?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. But you think of it as kind of,
It's often claimed, and often debunked, but it's not true.
Is that true of other dangerous jobs? Coal mining or construction jobs?
Yes, it is true for dangerous jobs.
Yeah.
Non-military dangerous.
So you have, you may not have a ton of skill, but you can take this risk and get a higher pay, and that's not illegal, right? And so I want to address the concern that it's unjust. The burden is unjust on certain members of society. If by unjust we mean things are not perfectly correct, things are not the way we would have them be if we could design it all ourselves, that's true. But that's just true all the time.
Well, if you look at who benefits and who loses from the current situation of not allowing you to sell your kidneys, the shortage of kidneys, people dying. The people dying, it's fairly equal across income groups, right? So the death is fair in a lot of ways when it comes to medical
right. The great equalizer.
The people who would be receiving the transplants under this situation where you have a third party paying also would be fair. There would be no income distinction. It's purely about health. And right now you have a situation where if you're ultra rich, you can go somewhere else and you can get a transplant.
True.
And you can donate a hospital wing or something, and suddenly you're at the top of the line. Or you can be a famous baseball player who was an alcoholic, like Mickey Mantle, and then get a liver transplant ahead of other people. So that seems fundamentally unfair to me. So that's why I'm not persuaded by a lot of the economic unfairness arguments, because most of them you can apply to lots of different things
you
that
can
we
see
see
the
are perfectly fine.
Right. So are you more persuaded by the sort of personalist argument about the dignity of the person, the slippery slope into this?
We'll get to that after we come back from the break.
Let's do it.
And join us when we come back from this exciting break.
Body language can tell you all sorts of things. Like someone is having a stroke. Know the sudden signs. Learn fast. Face drooping, arm weakness, speech difficulty. Time to call 911 and get them to a hospital immediately. Learn the body language and spot a stroke fast.
For those dealing with the daily struggles of caring for a loved one, we hear you. That's why AARP created a community with experts and other caregivers to help us better care for ourselves and the ones we love.
Hi, welcome back to Free Exchange. Rachel Douchant was just making a point about some philosophy, something or other, and I'd like I'm fascinated to hear the rest of it.
Okay, so there's a movement called Personalism. It's a great mixture of sort of Kant's idea that we ought to always treat persons as ends in themselves. They're not objects to be used, but rather they have their own dignity and value that is not economic in nature. And so you have, it's very strong in Catholic social thought. One of the great personalists was Karol Wojtyła, otherwise known as John Paul II. But also bringing in Thomistic notions of natural law and so forth. And the big enemy is utilitarianism. So the utilitarians are the greatest good for the greatest number, just raise the aggregate happiness. And economists, no offense, tend to accidentally be utilitarians. They're not necessarily reflective about it, but because you're looking at aggregates, it's easy to say, well, we'll let this happen to some because it'll benefit others or something like that.
Well, that's a starting point of the discussion. They don't conclude that's what it should be, but yeah.
But you can see how it's easy to fall into it if you're not holding yourself accountable to some philosophical standard, some ethical standard. And so the personalists would, I guess, be concerned about the sale of human organs because of that idea of commodification, this notion that there's a slippery slope into treating the human body, which is part of the human person. That's an important point, that the human person includes her body. And so if you treat the human body as something to be bought and sold, then that's just a direction we don't want to go in. And and we don't allow slavery, for instance, and so this would be like a step towards it. Now, I always want to remind people that the term slippery slope is actually the title of a fallacy. It's a logical fallacy. So the fact that you allow something, one step towards a conclusion doesn't mean you're going to slide down the slippery slope to the conclusion.
Oh, it's presented as if there's always a slippery slope.
Yeah, like that's a reason. It's not a reason. It's actually a bad argument. So the fact that, for instance, I allow the sale of my labor does not mean that we allow for slavery, although some people talk that way. But actually, that's a great source of freedom for me to be able to trade labor with you for things.
Well, let me present a different type of market or financial payment for organs, because we've mostly been referring to kidneys, so that's like a live transplant. Although a lot of the kidney transplants are also from cadavers; they're not live transplants.
Okay.
But all of the other organs are from cadavers. So it's people who sign their donor card.
Right.
They die under some circumstance, and then their organs are harvested and lives are saved. Now, the people who do that, and then their organs end up being spread around, get no remuneration afterwards, or their estate gets no remuneration. And there have been arguments to say, well, give $20,000 or $5,000 per organ or something like that, or
right.
pay the funeral expenses or something to the family.
Yeah.
And here it's not the person directly benefiting; they're not using the body anymore, and that seems to be a different ethical issue than a live person selling one of their two kidneys.
So Spain has adopted a system in which they assume consent or presume consent. So instead of having you sign the back of the donor card, you actually just assume that unless they've said no to having their organs harvested, they can harvest them.
Now, I find that to be ethically worse, much, much worse
Okay.
than paying somebody, because you're assuming that the state owns your physical body.
That's a great point.
And
right.
you have to opt out of the state owning your body.
Right.
And I find that more repulsive than paying somebody for their kidneys.
Okay, but so does the individual person have to approve it before they die, then the family?
Well, you have the donor card right now. You sign the donor card, you check the box when you get your driver's license.
So if we pay it, people are going to pay more attention to checking the box.
Right.
Okay, right.
Right.
And so, and then that could go to the family or whomever. And so that you'd be more comfortable with than live transplants, because there you feel like a greater...
I'm relatively comfortable with both.
Yeah.
But I recognize that other people probably would be more comfortable with the latter. Well, with the paying people for the donated organs after they die than the live transplant of
And of course,
kidneys.
if it's true that if my kidney fails and I've already sold my other kidney, then I could die from that. I read an article that said that I guess in China, people have shown great willingness to sell their corneas, I think, which really, wow. I'm assuming that makes them blind in one eye.
I would assume so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm not a scientist or a doctor, but like you said, there's that ick factor of a great number of poor Chinese people walking around blind in one eye because they've sold their cornea.
People always bring up transplants in China, black market in China, and well, we're not in China.
That's true.
China has some serious problems, and that has more to do with
China.
Yeah, and the extreme
that's a great
poverty of
point.
some people in China and the desperation.
We could solve that in other ways.
Than with what the United States should do.
Okay, that's a
because
great
right
point.
now, in fact, because we have a black market, we have a black market in these organs, like kidneys, you can go to China and get an organ that has been paid and from exactly that, because there's a black market.
Yeah.
It's the fact that it's illegal, that there's a black market, that you get those sorts of situations. So those examples are usually actually have the opposite effect on the argument.
That's a really
actually
great
an argument
point.
for allowing a market to exist, because it's the black market that creates the issues,
Right.
not the legalization of the trade.
Right. So if we had it legalized here, then we could oversee that process and make sure it was done respectfully.
You know, it would be done in hospitals.
And it wouldn't be done in that, we wouldn't be drawing on that oppressive situation over there.
Right, like automobiles. There's a big market for automobiles. There's lots of information on automobiles. You try to get dealers you trust, like you would get a hospital you trust.
Yeah.
And there's all this research. You're
Yeah.
sure of where the car is coming from
Right.
and all of that. It's not like suddenly you just get all these faulty kidneys and
Yeah.
other organs out there. It works for other products.
Right. I could see that. Yeah. See, that's what they're going to hate. The use of the phrase products.
intentional.
Yeah. That's troublesome. And I get how that's troublesome. I think that I can see the personalist philosopher appreciating the distinction between the sale of live organs and simply the incentivizing of people donating their organs after they die, because the sale of live organs affects the flourishing of that individual. And also you have the do no harm with the doctors. So in a way you could avoid, if you simply incentivize the sale of organs from those who are passing away, then you could avoid the problems that we have over here with harming those who are still alive. Feeling like we're giving them a life that isn't as
Perhaps. Again, it's only with kidneys, really, that you do the live transplants, and I'm not sure about
Or
the medical-
corneas.
Or corneas, apparently.
Yeah. Can't you donate parts of your liver? Sometimes they just need a part?
I'm not sure, but I
Yeah.
know that you can get half a liver.
Yeah.
Transplanted.
I don't know if people can donate those, but anyway. So I don't know because I don't know exactly where I stand on this either. I'm not necessarily opposed to the transplant of live organs, but I could see, I can certainly see the concern about commodification and the flourishing of the poor and clearly someone in a desperate situation who might be willing to do something in a moment of desperation that they wouldn't otherwise be willing to do. It's going to affect them for the rest of their lives. I can definitely see those. That feels somewhat compelling to me. And
I hear these arguments for things that are perfectly acceptable. But there are still arguments saying, we shouldn't treat it as a commodity. So I've heard arguments, food, it's a necessity. Why do we have it commodified? Medical care, why is that commodified?
Sure.
Well, the reason it's commodified is because that's how you get more of it. And that's how you get this essential thing provided.
Just to get the incentives going. And we do sell, people are paid to box, right? People are paid to play football. People, all sorts of things that are, have been shown to be highly risky activities. And we think it would be insane to make those activities illegal just because people are taking a risk to do it.
Yes, no, it's right. I often I use the boxing example as a student. I said, if you turn around and punch him, you'll go to jail. But if you agree that whoever punches the one hardest gets $10, then it's perfectly fine.
That's a good point. Yeah. And so I often, when I'm talking to personalist philosophers, because I have a serious sympathy with them, I often think of St. Thomas Aquinas, who's a great authority in this area. And he deals with the issue of prostitution. Here's a case where you're selling your body. That's where we get that phrase. And he, of course, does not think it's wonderful for people to be buying, sex with prostitutes. He would rather that we live in a world where that wasn't happening at all. But he answers the question whether or not it should be illegal, and he says no. Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century says, no, this man is a saint, okay, of the Catholic Church and a doctor.
A capital S saint.
A capital S saint, yes, and he's a doctor of the church, which means he's considered an authority. And his argument is that people are going to do this activity, and you're only going to get worse problems trying to prohibit it than you would allowing it. And that's really all he says about it. And so I think that there are some resources in the tradition to address this issue. I love his line where he says, be careful what you try to do with the law, which is more of a cudgel than a scalpel, right? He says if you try to pull up all the weeds, you might pull up the flowers with them. I really like that metaphor. And so maybe this is the same sort of situation where you certainly, if you want to value human life, what about all the people who are dying because they're waiting for a kidney, right?
Well, I'm not actually convinced about the market for organs, what the law should be.
Yeah.
My job, and I keep is first you get the economics right, and then you can decide. And most of the discussion gets the economics wrong.
Okay.
And then has philosophical arguments that I just don't buy at all. And there was I show a film or a video to my class all the time, which is a doctor says, well, why don't you allow this person to get paid who is giving up their kidney? And he says, well, that would take the caring out of the process for the person. And I just think, oh, my goodness, presumably you're getting paid for doing the medical procedure. Right. Doesn't this take the caring out of the process for you? Wouldn't you be saved if we prevented you from getting paid $1 million a year for doing transplants? Because you must be horror-stricken, the fact that you have to receive all of that money for providing this service.
Yeah, and it just takes all the goodness out of what you're doing because you're being paid for it.
And so those arguments...
And Pope Francis said the same thing. He said, we want this to be a charitable act. I'm thinking, well, anything in life could be a charitable act. You can give it away if you want to. But that doesn't mean that you can't also have a system that pays for it. Not everybody is very charitable. And if we need more of these things, we can't just depend on those who are charitable.
Well, I think it's an interesting situation that will evolve over time, because it wasn't that long ago that transplants themselves were viewed as unethical.
Yep.
And in Japan, they've only recently even had any transplants at all. So
really,
and that's a modern-ish society.
Yeah.
And it was only recently that they're allowing any transplants. So for years, they were happy to have people die, even though there's a routine what's become a routine medical procedure in the United States.
Exactly, and I mean this emphasis on the body as the temple of the Holy Spirit, and that kind of idea, stopped people from looking at cadavers, centuries ago. And so, finally over time they realized, oh no, we really need to do this, and we can do it in a respectful way. And so it's a similar kind of logic. I'm
sure this will get some traction over the years, because the New York Times editorial came out with an incredibly stupid response to the argument for allowing payment, so that they're getting upset.
Okay, so it's in the conversation.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for joining us for Free Exchange. I'm Howard Wall, the director of the Hammond Institute, and if you want to visit our website, it's at www.lindenwood.edu/Hammond Institute, something or other. You'll find it. Google Hammond Institute, you'll find it. Thank you.